What is up, guys? We are back with another video, and Gigabyte has a full line of their AORUS Z690 motherboards. There's a ton of boards in that line, but today we're taking a look at specifically the Z690 AORUS Ultra. So let's go ahead and take a look. As we take a first look at the board here, we can see that Gigabyte has changed the design a little bit from the previous generation. Here we have a black PCB with kind of silver and black accents. While I do like the look of the board, I think the previous generation definitely just stood out a little bit more. Starting at the CPU socket, we of course have Intel's LGA 1700 socket, which is going to be on all Z690 motherboards. Surrounding the CPU socket, we of course have our power delivery components, and Gigabyte is going with a 19-phase power design with 105 amp power stages for the V-core phases. So this board can support a total output of 1880 amps with 1680 amps dedicated to the V-core. Covering the power delivery components, we have two large heatsinks, which really bring the top half of the board together. These heatsinks make use of the Fins Array 2 louvered stack design, which actually increases the surface area by 300% compared to traditional heatsinks, and also improves thermal efficiency with better airflow and heat exchange. Hiding above the heatsinks, you'll find an 8-pin EPS connector as well as an optional 4-pin. As we move across the top of the board, there are two fan headers. One's for your CPU fan and one is an optional CPU fan header. And then you have a 3-pin addressable RGB header and a 4-pin standard RGB header. Moving over to the memory slots, we have 4 DDR5 DIMM slots, which are metal reinforced. These slots support up to 128 gigabytes of DDR5 6200 memory. Along the edge of the board, you'll find a large power button, postcode display, 24-pin ATX power connection, two 4-pin fan headers, a USB 3.2 Gen 1 header, a USB 3.2 Gen 2x2 header, and two Thunderbolt headers. Coming down the board, you'll find 6 SATA 6 gig ports, and of course at the bottom of the board is where you're going to find the rest of your headers and connections. From left to right, you have your front panel audio header, 3-pin addressable RGB header, 4-pin standard RGB header, TPM header, two USB 2.0 headers, Q-Flash plus button, 4 4-pin fan headers, front panel headers, and a small reset button. The bottom half of the board is characterized by heatsinks, although they don't extend as far down as we've seen in previous generations of this board. I'm not the biggest fan of this. I would say cover as much of the board as possible with heatsinks. Both of the heatsinks on the board are silver, and the top one actually has a pretty thick fin array on top of it, which is going to make removing your graphics card quite the task. Under the top heatsink is an M.2 slot that's directly connected to the CPU and supports Gen 4 M.2 solid state drives. Under the larger bottom heatsink, you'll actually find 3 M.2 slots. 2 of these slots support Gen 4 drives, while the third slot supports both Gen 4 and SATA M.2 drives. All of these slots feature thermal tape not only on the heatsinks, but on the bottom section as well. I did find it a bit odd that the screws on the top heatsink are not the same size as the one on the bottom heatsink. I actually didn't even have a screwdriver that would fit, these smaller bottom screws. I had to order one off Amazon, and it's kind of a bummer that Gigabyte didn't even include a screwdriver. As far as expansion slots go, there's a single PCI Express 5.0 x16 slot and 2 PCI Express 4.0 x16 slots, which are both X4 electrical. The top slot is metal reinforced, while the bottom 2 slots are not. Coming to the rear I/O, we have an integrated I/O shield that is all black. And then when it comes to our connections from left to right, we have 4 USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports, Wi-Fi antenna connections, 4 USB 2.0 ports, display port, a single USB 3.2 Gen 2x2 Type-C port, 4 USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports, 2.5 gig Ethernet, and our audio connections, which are limited to optical, mic, and line out. When it comes to RGB lighting on the board, the only thing that really lights up is the AORUS logo on the rear I/O cover, and I feel for an AORUS board that's just really toned down. I know we're kind of cutting back on RGB lighting, but I just feel for an Aorus board, having only one thing light up is just a bit limited. Now you do of course have all of the RGB headers on the board. If you wanted to add RGB fans or an RGB strip, you can go ahead and do that. At the end of the day, I think this is a really good board from Gigabyte. I've always loved the Aorus line. And when it comes to Alder Lake, this is gonna have kind of everything that you want in kind of the Alder Lake chipset or, ecosystem. Talking about CPU support first, we get 680 amps for the CPU, a very solid VRM. So if you're gonna be running, an i9 12900K or 1200KS, you shouldn't have an issue with this board at all. No issues with VRM cooling when we did our overclocking. The Fins Array 2, which Gigabyte has used for a couple generations now, is great, and it keeps, your VRM nice and cool, so no issues there. You're also gonna get USB 3.2 Gen 2x2 on this board, and Gigabyte is one of the few that puts an internal header as well as a rear header. A lot of companies are doing an internal header and then a Thunderbolt 4 on the back, and if you connect a Type-C USB device to the Thunderbolt 4, it's only gonna run at USB 3.2 Gen 2, so like 1,000 megabytes a second instead of 2,000 megabytes a second like you would get from, the connection that's on this board. You're also gonna get 4 Gen 4 NVMe slots on this board, so that's quite a lot for a mainstream board as well. PCI Express 5.0 support as far as graphics go in that top slot. Most of these kind of like first run Z690 boards are not going to have Gen 5 NVMe support yet. You don't get that on this board. I'm not the biggest fan of the design of this board. I really liked that last generation of Aorus boards on the Intel side. This I just feels just a little, I don't know, it's kind of toned down. Like I said, there's not a whole lot of RGB lighting, and just the overall design I'm not the biggest fan of. But I think this board has everything that you're gonna want for the Z690 kind of ecosystem. It kind of checks all of those boxes. And of course they have higher end boards or lower end boards. If you don't want something, if you want to, want something like 10 gig LAN or something like that, you can kind of go up a little bit. But I think overall it is a really good Z690 board, and it's decently affordable. This board is going to be $329 on Amazon, which I think is good for kind of what you're getting. So if you have any questions about this board, definitely go ahead and leave it in the comment section below. And if you did enjoy this video, I would appreciate it if you hit the thumbs up. We'll see you guys in the next video.